Hey guys, welcome back. So now, there's a couple things we gotta talk about real quick. And actually there's a lot of stuff we gotta talk about. But we gonna make our way through it. But before we get back into Joker War, there's a couple of tie-ins I wanna talk about real quick. And with both, heavily focused on Nightwing. To where with this one, we'll start with the Joker arriving in Bludhaven and doing us all a favor. And after that, we will get into the conclusion of the Rick Grayson saga, which we have endured the peaks and valleys of on this channel. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch your spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so you can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so to start this off, and starting off with the Nightwing conclusion within Year of the Villain. Cause Nightwing through Year of the Villain, it just flows like right into Joker War. And for anyone who's kind of just jumping in here, don't worry, I got a link below that'll catch you up from Batman issue 55 and Nightwing issue 50. And that'll bring you up to this point, starting with Nightwing issue 68, cause it's a lot. And if you're just jumping in here and you're a Nightwing fan, like you're gonna be lost, like the most lost Nightwing fan ever. So link below if you need to catch up, and if you have any questions about the Rick Grayson saga so far, on top of what we talked about in the playlist, either ask away in the comments, or better yet, reach out on Discord, and either myself or another one of the Spillmongers will be able to help you out. But picking up from where we left off, when Rick Grayson had became a Talon, that influence was then broken when Red Condor destroyed the goggles which were feeding Rick memories, which had led him to believe that he had lived his life being raised as a Talon. But aside from this, also keep in mind, like the mind control and the influence which William Cobb was taken advantage of, it had began with Dr. Haas, who had been treating Rick Grayson for years, and using a combination of verbal memory manipulation, hypnosis, and drug therapy, and in combination with the identity crystal, which she wore around her neck at every session, but with doing this using all these methods to groom Rick to take his place with his family, William Cobb, and become like the greatest Talon of all time. But just going forward, I want you to keep in mind that the identity crystal, like in a lot of ways, that is the main connection of control which Dr. Haas had over Rick Grayson in order to tap into his identity, literally, and pour in this new lifetime of memories which was then brought by William Cobb. And once the goggles were broken, that influence no longer took hold. And for Cobb, it was a pretty big deal because the goggles were a gift to him from Lex Luthor in order to speed up the process and bring in Rick sooner, and in exchange for Cobb siding with Doom and Perpetua. But in a situation where you gotta fight Richard Grayson standing on top of some wires on a bridge, like you know good and well Richard's gonna win that fight. And it was really one of those moments that showed you, like, regardless of Talon being one of your top 10 DC fighters, but if you put him on a rope and tell him to fight Nightwing, like Richard Grayson is just gonna have balance in every orientation before you even realize which way is up. And that played into his favor in a huge way when the goggles were broken and he faced William Cobb. But outside of the treatments that Dr. Haas was doing and all the intentions with the fake memories from William Cobb, like aside from that, the identity of Rick Grayson, like this is what he has come to totally on his own, from starting over, meeting Beatrice, who sometimes either goes by B or Bia, but this part, Rick Grayson at his core, which he's returned to, this is the identity which Richard Grayson had pieced together himself with starting his life over and building this new identity from the ground up. But after the incident with William Cobb, Rick still had a number of memories from both different lives which were conflicting with one another, and he needed to sort out from there what he needed to keep and what he needed to throw away. And I'm pretty sure like the trained childhood of assassin is like the obvious choice, but instead he really just needed to sort out what was the truth, and on the other hand also keep what is useful information, which from there led him to seek out Dr. Haas for help. But at this point, trying to piece this together, Richard didn't know that Dr. Haas was involved, and from his perspective she would be the first one to ask for help, being that from his understanding she played a huge part into getting him where he's at. But after reaching out a number of times and her not returning calls, he had then went to her office, which is in Gotham, in order to ask for her help directly. And of course at this point Bia had came along for support. But when they had went all that way and Dr. Haas wasn't there, Richard had then broke into Dr. Haas's office, and when he did, he'd once again see the Friendly Owl book from his childhood, which really wasn't a surprise because he had seen Dr. Haas with that book before, like she had recommended it to him. But then after that, when they actually find a Court of Owls mask in her office, then it was kind of like, hey, wait a minute, because then he knew undoubtedly she was involved and he was being manipulated this whole time. And so this kind of turned the search for answers into a more aggressive mode, because later Rick then tracked Dr. Haas down in Switzerland, with him knowing that she was involved, but Richard still wasn't aware of the identity crystal. But of course, with him finding her, this quickly went south, and it nearly turned into part 2 of Richard becoming a Talon again, which really could have been a whole event within itself, directly out of the death of Nightwing and really skipping the whole Team Nightwing Nightwing thing. And you guys already know how I feel about Team Nightwing. But as it turns out, lo and behold, somebody else feels the exact same way. And during the time that Rick was in Switzerland, this somebody, who was located in Gotham, he had been looking for Nightwing, and this is when he had heard about Team Nightwing on the news. And that someone, of course, was the Joker, which is something we see in Nightwing issue 69, but it's really like the setup for the Nightwing Joker War tie-ins that begin in Nightwing issue 70, because the Joker is disgusted by these fake Nightwings, and it's here where he decides to go to Bludhaven himself, first and foremost to find the real Nightwing, but then also to send a message that there is no room for any other Nightwing aside from the original. But while the Joker's en route, back to Richard over in Switzerland, because at this point with him going to Dr. Haas and her using the identity crystal to kind of reset and get him back on that Talon path, because essentially the identity crystal, it has the power to open your inner mind and make it a blank canvas so the user can put whatever type of history they want to within the person. But in the case of Richard with his injury, they were just trying to make it permanent. But with Dr. Haas trying to pull Richard back into that Talon life, one of the guards overheard him resisting, and with the overreaction of the century, he triggers explosives on the whole castle. And when he did this, I couldn't tell if the dude was like super dedicated or he just pushed the wrong button trying to call for backup. But when this happened, Richard tried to save Dr. Haas, but he wasn't able to, and all he could grab before she fell in the water was the identity crystal. And it's really like that classic hero situation to where like the hero just couldn't save the person, but they caught something valuable before they fell to their death. Kind of like the time when Spider-Man caught the little bitty vial of Morbius's blood. Like, he missed Morbius' whole body, but he caught the little vial of blood. And really, I think Morbius holds a grudge because of that, like, to this day. But in the case of Richard Grayson, after this, he then takes the identity crystal and makes his way back to Bludhaven to see Beatrice at the Prodigal Bar so they can figure out what to do next. But at this time, also in Bludhaven, there's somebody new in town who's been stirring up trouble. And as usual with Team Nightwing, Detective Sapienza, he's the first one to show up. And when he does, because the bodies are so brutally carved up with knives, he initially believes that Talon has came back, especially with how badly he had injured the youngest member of Team Nightwing. But very quickly, Sapienza realizes that this was not Talon, and even quicker than that, he wishes that it was. Because in a true horror fashion, the Joker sneaks up on this dude and he cooks the side of this dude's face, like he didn't even have a chance. But even with doing this, like in a classic Joker fashion, like he is taking his time with this guy, and not only just to have fun in his own sick, twisted way, but also with his plan of getting rid of all these fake Nightwings, he's also come to the conclusion that they would know where to find the real Nightwing. But in the case of Richard, who's also back in Bludhaven, he's made his way stumbling into the Prodigal Bar, and mostly because at this point the headaches have returned, which is something we've seen all the way back from Nightwing issue 50. And since then it's been described as either a part of the physical healing process, or as multiple memories fighting for their way to the front, or even a combination of both. And Beatrice suggests from here that she calls Barbara Gordon for help, and mainly because she's the only person that Beatrice knows from Richard's past who's shown up frequently, checking on him and trying to help out. And Batman don't count because he kind of been just lurking in the shadows and peeping from rooftops, like here and there from time to time. But on this night, there was another person who was peeping in from the rooftop at the Prodigal Bar. And as soon as Beatrice and Richard had went downstairs, the Joker came through the window and tiptoed his way over to the identity crystal. But at this point, Beatrice and Richard, they're trying to figure out like what's the next step to help Rick with his headaches occurring more frequent and sometimes feeling even worse. And at this point, it's a quick conversation because as soon as he hears sirens, he goes running to like what the issue is, because as we've seen, though he's not Nightwing, he still wants to help. But as soon as Richard leaves, the Joker then comes downstairs after what was probably his most difficult try not to laugh challenge, because from the look of it, he was sitting up there for at least an hour, and probably longer than that, which we'll talk about once we get deeper into it. But as he slowly makes his way down the stairs, he tells Beatrice that he's there to help, and it immediately catches her off guard because she's like, okay, well, how do you know about Richard? How do you know about him being Nightwing? So on and so forth. But when the Joker comes down the stairs and into the light, first off, he is wearing Sapienza's Nightwing costume, and it's torn and it's soaked in Sapienza's blood, which is kind of a hint to how that went. And when Bea sees him, she immediately knows who the Joker is. Like, everybody knows who the Joker is. And when she sees him, like, she is stuck. Like, she freezes because she's alone at the bar with this psychopath. But after this, I also want to jump over to Detective Sapienza, who's in the emergency room, and as soon as Detective Colleen Edwards finds out, she rushes in to speak to him. And at this point, I believe Detective Edwards was already at the hospital because of her younger brother, who had been cut up by Talon the last time they were all out as Team Nightwing, or at least in and out of the hospital frequently, with the exception of the attack from Talon Rick Grayson. But when she rushes in trying to get answers from him just before he goes under his anesthetic, she does this because she knows from Hutch, one of the other Nightwings, that this couldn't have been Talon, because Hutch told her that Talon was out of the picture. And just before he can fully get to tell her who it was, like, he gets the first 3 letters out, then he flatlines. And with that, I don't know what else to tell you, but I will say, like, had she waited, he probably would have made it. And I mean, that's not a guarantee, but I believe it's about a 11 out of 10 chance. And so now, real quick before we go, I want to give a special shout out to all the Patreons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below to where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. And so now, aside from this, there's like one more video I want to do as far as Joker War tie-ins before we get back into Joker War. And there's a ton of other stuff you guys want me to get into as well, as we prepare for 10 of Swords, The King in Black, and there's so much I want to talk about with those 2 events before we even get started with them. But as far as Nightwing, I really feel like we got to conclude the Rick Grayson arc before we get back into Joker War. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.